What would you do if you only had 1 minute with Thoma? Well, aside from your sleazy remarks, we're supposed to be doing some housekeeping, but that's not what this channel is all about, and instead, let's jump off this cliff and find out how good Thoma really is. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Elyon, a new free-to-play MMO that just came out. Elyon's world is vast, and there's a ton of activities you can do, from fun aerial challenges to writing cards in abandoned mines, to even solving some puzzles that will make you think twice. But besides having fun and admiring the awesome visuals, there's also a deep skill customization system for each class in the game, and there's a lot of ways you can experiment with different builds to find the right one you like the most. And you can also expect to see plenty of endgame content like clan wars where you fight for the dimensional portals, or go into many of the different dungeons and fight against some of the most badass looking bosses. Elyon has officially launched on October 20th, and it's completely free to play, so you should definitely give it a try, and by using the link in the description or pinned comment, you'll also help out the channel big time. Before we get some juicy information about Thoma, please keep in mind the point of this video is not to review him, but merely obtain first impressions from the limited amount of interactions we can get from this silly trial that literally lets you walk around a small part of the island for a minute before kicking you out of the quest. So let's start with something that's probably the most crucial thing about him, the burst. Now, it's got a heavy cost of 80, which means you'll need some artifacts or other characters to help out with his energy generation, since looking at his elemental skill, it has a pretty long cooldown of 15 seconds and generates somewhere between 3 to 4 particles, and that's not going to be enough if you want to activate his burst the moment the cooldown is off. The other big thing would be the internal cooldown on his burst attacks, and if you don't know what that is, well, it's basically like a limit to how many times you can trigger reactions with character elemental attacks, and for someone who can release a wave of pyro damage roughly every second, it won't generate your favorite reactions like vaporize or melt on every hit. Now, is this a bad thing? Probably not, but once he is out, we'll have more concrete answers regarding this finding, and as of now, the initial analysis actually shows that he's pretty great with someone like Hu Tao, since he won't take away those important vaporizes she needs to do with her charged attacks, and works pretty well just as an additional support unit. This is also why he probably ended up on Hu Tao's rerun banner, since the two together will work nicely without too much friction, and it's possible this is going to be a new trend moving onwards with the game, as we've already witnessed this with Raiden's and Kujosara's banner, where they were basically made for each other, and it is more than likely the same is going to be with Arataki Ito and Goro once they're out. Also, another great thing about him is that his burst works just fine with Raiden during her sword mode, so thank the Archon, we won't have another fiasco like the one with Beto's burst functionality. And since Raiden's sword has a massive reach, especially when using her charged attack, causing overloads won't be such a big deal, although this will become more clear once Thoma is out, and we can take him for a spin on the Spiral Abyss together with the Archon. Finally, when looking at his elemental skill, it has a nice crisp animation and can be executed really fast, which will then produce a Pyro shield, but what's even more interesting, for a brief moment he gains Pyro status, which means you can cleanse him from some of those annoying elemental status effects. Come to think of it, this is something that got mentioned during the livestream. Also, at a quick glance, his normal attacks actually cover a good chunk of area around him, so it will be interesting to see how well would his physical build work, or if it's just going to end up as more of a niche option for those who really want to use him actively. Speaking of which, now that we're talking about damage, this next part is actually really fascinating and goes through some of the most burning questions you might have about his potential. Talking about Thoma's stats in this video is quite challenging, because if you take a look at his trial equipment, you'll notice MiHoYo decided to put on him a 4-piece set of Noblesse Oblige and gave him a Favonius Lance, both of which are decent options, but looking at the artifacts more closely, you can start seeing the inconsistency of stat distribution, and it's really hard to make a good judgment call when you cannot even build him properly. But what we can actually do is take a serious look at his damage multipliers. The elemental skill at level 11 barely does 280% damage, which is even powered up with a constellation, so it's pretty clear you shouldn't expect any exciting damage numbers flying off from his beautiful kick, and it will be there to more or less act as a source of energy and to refresh or boost the active shield, which is why the actual big number we need to be looking at is going to be the maximum shield absorption he gets. Again, at level 11, roughly 37% of his maximum health in addition to a flat bonus of 4,400 will be the threshold you can reach when you keep stacking his shield. In this trial run, we can see he has this much health, so by rough calculations, it's basically around 13,000 damage that can be absorbed, or more than 32,000 pyro damage if we rely on its effective absorption. But let's put this in layman's terms. Here's a squishy character like Klee at max level, and with offensive artifacts, she only has 16,000 health, so imagine this shield giving a nice defensive bubble from all those horrible things we're trying to protect her from. What's also crucial to understand is that we're talking about the maximum potential this shield can reach, but the reality is, you will be busy building it up when using Thoma's elemental burst, since that's basically how you can increase its absorption, and even if you take a hit once, well, it's like pushing back the progress bar and you can still keep getting more absorption afterwards. But this is where we need to talk about the burst itself. Just like the elemental skill, it's also nothing too dramatic when looking at the damage, and doesn't even come close when compared to Xingqiu's Hydro Swords or Beto's Lightning Arcs. But on the flip side, it's not targeting enemies and instead travels as a small wave of pyro, so anyone caught in it actually get damaged, which means there is potential to significantly increase the performance when going up against grouped enemies. Now let's not forget this lasts for 15 seconds, which gives you plenty of time to build up the shield and keep the team alive, while also dishing out moderate to high amount of damage. So what sort of initial conclusion do all of these findings brings us to? Well, it's pretty clear he's a defensive unit that won't make you squeal from the amount of damage he's going to do, but that shouldn't overshadow his capability to generate a consistent shield. There's still a ton of things that need to be tested once he's out, like going through every melt, vaporize, and even overload team variations to help come to a conclusion which team comps will benefit the most from him, not to mention the fact once we can put him on different equipment, there's a ton of possibilities waiting to be unfolded. But there's still one last thing that needs to be looked over when we talk about a 4-star character. Let's take a moment here to admit the fact we've barely ever seen a trial character getting a fair representation, and with the way you can check out Thoma during his hangout event, it really only provides a small part of the big picture. However, trials or not, miHoYo's first and foremost biggest interest is to make profit, and you can always see how they achieve their revenue when inspecting character constellations. Quite often, some of the drawbacks can get addressed from these magical solutions, and the more beneficial they are, the more critical we need to be about the character. Now, for Thoma, his first constellation isn't that big of a deal, but it does offer a decent 3-second reduction to his elemental skill and burst cooldowns, since the way it works is that some other character other than Thoma needs to be hit when the shield is active, and it will only trigger every 20 seconds, so effectively, it's not a huge improvement, but it might make your rotation smoother depending on when you use his burst. Speaking of which, this next one is pretty simple. Increase the duration of his burst by additional 3 seconds, which means more pyro damage and more shield absorption for a longer time. But here's when things get more interesting. At 4th constellation, what basically happens is that his burst cost goes down from 80 to 65, since you'll always get 15 energy after using it, and by having this awesome benefit, you can have more leeway when building up energy recharge on him. Finally, to embrace his role of a support character at 6th constellation, when Blazing Barrier is obtained or refreshed, everyone's normal charged and plunge attack damage is increased by 15%, which probably also means Thoma himself benefits from this buff. So are his constellations broken, balanced, or a letdown? Well, to be honest, the biggest standout has to be the 4th constellation by reducing his burst cost, while if you decide to push for additional copies of him, the second one could be a nice stopping point, since those 3 additional seconds can turn into slightly even more time thanks to something called hit lag, and it was actually tested during his trial that hit lag will increase the original duration of his burst by a second or sometimes even 2, although in all honesty, he should be perfectly fine at C0 because his whole playstyle revolves around defensive capabilities, while the actual damage will need to be re-evaluated during his launch, but it's doubtful any of these constellations are going to be massive increases to overall performance. Don't get me wrong, there is still going to be a pretty huge difference between a C0 and C6 Thoma, just like you would expect to see with every other 4-star character, but at the same time, it's not like a situation with Sucrose or Bennett or even Kujo Sara, where one of the constellations remove an important limiter and gives you more freedom when using them. Overall, from everything we've seen so far when given only a minuscule 60-second trial, it's quite exciting to see him show up on Hu Tao's banner, and there's definitely been a shortage of shield characters, besides Diona and Zhongli running the show, so let's see what happens when he comes out. There's still a lot of things that haven't been answered about Thoma's potential, and obviously, the two biggest suspects are his future teammates and optimal artifact sets. With the way his burst works, it's possible he might just be the next support you can slide into any team, or there's a chance there are some cool team combinations we might finally get to discover, since in all honesty, the team building meta has been pretty much set in stone, and while some characters like Raiden and Kazuha shook things up a little, it wouldn't hurt to get some more variety, especially for those who are starting out to play the game casually, so they can experience more fun and powerful team comps. But if you like this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and gently press the like button. And thanks to all of you who helped reach the 300,000 subscriber mark. Hope to see you again in the next video.